screams in the night. Indian legends. Miles of footprints. Sightings. What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Join us for eyewitness accounts, questions and answers, Bigfoot encounters of the past, and ongoing encounters in the present. Your host, two-time witness, field researcher for 43 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. We have David joining Brian and I this week. Fellas, how are you doing this evening?
Good.
Very well.
Well, David, we're just going to turn the microphone over to you. Take your time, walk us through the things that happened, and we'll take it from there.
What experience? Now, we already went through the other one, so what would you like to, where would you like to go with that?
Well, just start us off from the beginning and tell us the experiences you've had.
Well, the only experience, like I told you, I had one experience here, and that was the one in North Carolina that I think we covered it one other time, but I guess, well, we owned a home in North Carolina. We were doing some work on the home. I got the house and was redoing the house, and we'd been, for a couple of nights, we'd been hearing strange noises outside in the backyard. Now, I couldn't see the backyard because the addition I put on covered my back window where I looked, so I couldn't see back there, but I could hear everything going on back there. And I don't know if it was the deer I first heard making noises and yelling and, all kinds of weird, odd noises. And one night we heard some really, really loud, like scary noises, like things you wouldn't normally hear in your yard. So I ran downstairs and opened up my drawer, took a flashlight outside, and ran around the front yard. I thought I was going to sneak up on something. Ran around my house and went over my driveway section and put the flashlight on something that I thought wasn't supposed to be real. Well, that's basically what it comes down to. You hear people and watch TV shows, and especially those guys that are finding Bigfoot. I mean, if there's ever such a show to prove there isn't a Bigfoot, watch that show.
That would be the one,
but if you really want to know if there's a big, yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, who goes out into the woods? If you're a hunter and you're looking for an animal, who goes into the woods, blaring, yelling, banging on trees, and doing all the things that they do? It's odd.
Right. You're not going to attract any wildlife whatsoever.
I don't know what they're looking for, but whatever it is, the second they start that, it's going to be so far away, not wanting to do anything about, with them.
Right.
But I shined my flashlight on this creature, I guess you'd call it now a Bigfoot, but it didn't look like what I saw in those old videos, they always go back to that Gimlin Patterson video. It didn't look like that. Mm-hmm. From what I saw, it was a lot uglier than that. I mean, it was creepy looking. It like I told you, I think we talked about it one other time. It was the what is it? Then and Now, or Us, or what was that?
Right, Them and Us. Right.
Them and Us. That picture is the closest thing I've seen of what I saw that night. Probably just the hair in the front was over its eyes a little more. Like I couldn't really get a real good look at the eyes. The hair was in front of the eyes. Right. And I kind of caught it right in the middle of when it was walking away after it must have just killed this thing, because it was limp. The animal was limp. Mm-hmm. And I think that must have been the noise that I had heard. It might have been the deer, squealing, for all I know. That, what I mean, now that I look back on it.
Yeah, very possible.
But that thing. And I think I equated it one other time with you too, as people go through things in fear. You call it your underwear changing moment. I would call it more, if you've ever been in a car accident, that moment you get into the car accident when your heart stops, it's even though it's a fender bender or something, but your heart stops, and like everything just, the whole world stops, like right in front of your eyes. You know what I mean? That feeling you get.
Right.
If you've ever had that feeling, that's the feeling I got when I shined that on me. I mean, on that, whatever it was, the mm-hmm. Bigfoot, I guess. Mm-hmm. But, and I went on to my research. I mean, I just started going crazy. That's when I contacted you, and I just started researching all this stuff. trying to find out, because I didn't know who out there was, who to listen to. There's so much hoaxers out there. I didn't know what to, what would be real, what's not real. They do such good jobs these days and making videos that look real. Yeah,
I get things sent to me all the time. People want my opinion on them, and the first thing is, if something's on YouTube, that's kind of a red flag all by itself. If you had something legit, why would you go to YouTube and not, maybe to, a university or something to take a look at it?
Exactly.
Hey, Dave.
I mean.
Oh, how tall?
Sorry, Brian?
Oh, how tall and how big was this thing?
It stood sideways. It wasn't like facing me. It was standing sideways, and my yard goes down on a hill. It was sloped down. Now the hill was probably sloped down about, I would say, he was probably down about a good 6 feet down, and he was equal to me, and I'm about 6 foot tall. So that shows you he was a lot bigger than me. He was almost eye to eye with me, and that was sloping down almost 6 feet. Now, granted, I'm not saying he's 12 feet, but wherever he was standing down there, he was probably a good couple of feet taller than me to look at me eye to eye. You know what I mean? And I couldn't tell how wide he was at all because he was standing sideways. He was a lot bigger than a person. You can get. You know what I mean? But I could not. At that moment, that I'm not worried really about all those things. I am just, how am I going to get out of here? This predicament I just put myself in. That was basically all I cared about at the moment. And for anybody to walk out and talk about getting a phone or a video or something, or a picture of something, good luck.
Yeah, that's true. I think
good luck.
I think when I had my first encounter, the second one was easy. It was in a car, but that was back before cell phones. I think it would have been the last thing on my mind to reach in my pocket and grab a cell phone and take a picture of what was standing in front of me.
You're thinking of saving your own ass. That's what you're thinking of.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and that's how I felt, and I'll never forget after, and like, I think we had this discussion too. I was never going to stand still. I would have crawled. I would have fallen. I would have been like with the movies you watch when the people are falling over everything, but they keep going. They're tripping and falling. That would have been me. I actually ran straight in the house, but I could have almost lost my footing. You know what I mean? That's how fast I was trying to go. I was like walking. I was like Jesus walking on water.
Right.
I was going so fast.
Well, listen, David, you always have
great questions.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, when I got in the house, I stood in my what's that? The landing of the when you walk in front, and I stood there for probably, I don't know how long, a good, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. I stood there stunned. All I could think of is, how are they going to get in the house after me? I locked the doors. I'd said, he's going to come in here. I thought they were good. I thought they were right behind. He was right behind me. And I didn't think there was multiple ones, but after we talked and I've looked and researched it, I think there was probably other ones with them.
Oh yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Well, listen.
Go
ahead.
No, I was just going to say, a moment changed your life. That's all I could say.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say, you and I have exchanged emails quite often, and you always have great questions. So it might be a good time to jump right into the Q&A if you guys are up for that.
Sure.
Absolutely. That's what I really wanted to get into a little bit of this with you a little. Okay. I think I didn't get this book that you had. I've gotten one of your books, but I didn't get the book. You have a book out there that goes back and dates a lot of like older.
Yeah, my first book,
people's sightings and
my first book, Notes from the Field.
And that's what it was all about.
Well, not all the book.
Because that's where. Yeah.
The first portion of the book, I can't remember, the second chapter, I think. What it does, it sort of brings, people who might not be familiar with the subject, sort of from, ancient times up to the present. That's what the first half of the book is about.
Right. That is my, like what I was starting to tell you is looking now, and I've been looking at different, and I've even asked you the different questions of different YouTube videos, and what do you think of this, or pictures. people back in those days didn't lie about that stuff. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have cameras. They didn't take pictures of it. They explained only what they saw. You know, they'll come out with this ape man that does this or moves like no human could, and all these different things. The way they describe what they saw is very much like our sightings are now. A lot of the sightings we get now.
And
exactly
what's compelling about that is when you look at all those that go back literally hundreds of years, there's a consistency. And I've said this many times, over time and geography, there's a consistency in the reports. You get the same details, in other words, you know, from one report that are totally unrelated from one another. And it's remarkable that people can just blow that off and ignore them.
I mean, I was looking, I wrote down a bunch of different things, and just to give people an understanding of what I'm talking about. This is 1895, Winsted, Connecticut. This is what it's written now. The first selectman in Winsted, Connecticut, the guy's name was Riley Smith, all right? And I don't know if you have this in your book, but this is what the type of articles that I'm talking about. It comes in the first thing right in the article. It says, large man naked, covered with hair over his entire body, was seen by first selectman Mayor Riley Smith. Mr. Smith was picking berries with his bulldog. The bulldog was paralyzed instantly with fear. This 6-foot creature, dark brown to black hair, walking like a man, looking like an ape, was incredibly agile, muscular. And the guy even make a note here that says, muscular and no ordinary man would stand a little chance against. You know, so that's telling you a little bit how scared even the first selection must have been when he saw it, you know?
Yeah.
And that's 1895.
Yeah.
The first select, this is kind of, you could lose everything, you know?
Correct.
You know, these are people that have something to lose, Will. These are people that here he is, he's the mayor of the town, you know, Winsted, Connecticut, and he's writing this article in the, you know, in the paper. This guy's not lying about it. He saw something that we're seeing now, you know?
And think about the description. It's very similar to the descriptions we get today.
You know? And I have written down so many. I've gone over one by one, all these old articles going all the way up into the 70s, kind of like you did in your book you were telling me. And it's just amazing. It's amazing, all the ones that these people have seen. All they have to do is Google it. Google it. Don't take the words from anybody of somebody that watches YouTube now with all the hoax and the trickery and all the things that people do today. You don't need to. Go back to the day when people used to not have to lock their doors. Everybody, you know, somebody giving you the word was like everything in life. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. These are the people telling you these descriptions and telling you stuff. They got, you know, they're not going to lie to you about it. They had nothing to gain or lose back in these days. They just didn't know what the heck they were looking at.
And even if you did get one or two people fabricating things, you've got hundreds and hundreds of these accounts out there.
Almost every state, Will. Yeah. Every state. I have a paper written for every state in America. Every single one.
That's true.
I think maybe not Nevada.
You know, Dave, on that note, too, there's a book that came out recently, and I forget the name of it offhand. Maybe I'll try to find it for next week. But it does give a comprehensive historical account, and it goes through state by state, every single state except for Hawaii, of course, because Hawaii is the only state that has never gotten any eyewitnesses. But it goes through state by state, and it lists tons and tons and tons of documented accounts.
And you could go back to John Green's 1973 book, The Sasquatch File. And that's essentially what Green did in that book.
You know, and I had a girl at work. I had told a girl that we had started talking about the subject at work. And then the first thing she says to me is, well, my father says watching the Finding Bigfoot, if there was something out there, they would have found it by now. And I said, look, these idiots couldn't find the way out of a brown bag. I mean, these guys, you don't show up in the woods. Most of the people that see these in woods, besides hikers and that, are hunters. What are hunters doing?
Well,
hunters are quiet. Yes, absolutely. You know, this thing, you want, if you really wanted to see this, which I think we talked about this before, that's the last thing you want to see. Believe me when I tell you.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you fear for life and death. Believe me, that thing could have ripped my head off in a minute. I had that feeling. almost like when you go to the zoo and the tiger that stands up and then he goes up on his hind legs and he stands about 8 feet tall. You know that you feel very little. That's how I felt.
Right. Right.
But
Dave, prior to this, did you have any like sound? Like, did you hear any sounds before this?
That's a good question. I did about a week or two earlier. We heard a whole bunch of noise, but we just chalked it up as deer, like mating, like the noises that they make. My wife is, my father used to hunt and said that that's the noises they make. We heard some really, really strange noises, but we didn't think twice. Didn't even think about it. Just, wow, okay, whatever. But then that one night, it really was loud and it was really close. That's what made me go out there because I knew it was in my yard. I could hear how loud it was right down below where I was doing the addition. I was like, whoa, that's right there. I thought I was going to walk out there and see deer getting into it with each other. You know what I mean? That's what I really thought I was going to see.
And what about afterwards? The days afterwards?
Let's put it this way. I was out of that house in 2 weeks, Brian.
Oh.
I got my family out of that house. I never felt safe in that house again. I took off. If I can only tell somebody the boogeyman is real and the boogeyman is out there, that's the way I felt. I got myself a Glock 9mm, which now I find out would have done nothing to this thing, probably just angered it. But you know what I mean? I got myself a gun, and I still didn't feel safe because I wasn't home. My wife didn't know how to use the gun properly. I was like, I can't do this. The kids are getting off the bus. I think it was November, and the sun is going down at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My son is getting off the bus. It's dark out already. No way. I wasn't, you know what I mean? I wasn't at home. I'd be at work. I wasn't going to have it. So I got them right on out of there, and that was about the end of that.
Did you ever talk to your neighbors? Did they have any similar encounters?
My neighbor said he heard noises, heard sounds the night that the thing that happened that I saw, and I didn't tell him what I saw. I was never going to, tell that. I just said, "Did you hear the animals out there the other night?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't know what there was ruckus going on." That was the end. What was the end of our conversation? I was trying to feel him out to see if he saw anything, but all he kept saying is just that he'd heard the animals making noise. That's it.
Well, David, did you have any? I know you have tons of questions. You want to just go ahead and dive into the questions?
I should have been a little more prepared for that, for all that type of stuff for you, Will, for the different questions I have.
Oh, no problem. Just
I really wasn't.
Whatever comes to mind, or Brian, whichever one you guys want to, jump in there.
Well, I was going to tell you a little bit of news in the last week or so. It was reported that, not that this has to do with anything with Sasquatch, but it was reported that monkeys in South Africa were terrorizing a hospital after it was built on where they used to live. And not that they were attacking the patients or anything like that, but they were coming through the windows. And it just goes to show how territorial primates are. Once again, this is monkeys, not Sasquatches.
Absolutely. But all primates are very territorial.
Yeah.
I mean, including us.
Yeah.
I mean, I think especially us because, I think even things like road rage is a symptom of territoriality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I thought of a question if you have it whenever you guys are ready. So I just thought of something that
sure.
Jump in whenever you're ready for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, you ready? Okay. Will, you remember I emailed you a couple of weeks ago about the 3-year-old boy in North Carolina that went missing for 3 days in the wilderness?
Yes.
And he said that a bear kept him warm and fed him berries.
Yeah.
Have you heard of other children having similar things happen like that?
No.
With, Bigfoot experiences.
And I'll tell you, a lot of people instantly jumped on Bigfoot, and it's really not likely. Just because, and I certainly don't think it was a bear. It was probably a dog, if there was anything like that.
I heard that too, possibly.
I mean, there could be a lot of explanations. It could have been a person for all we know. I just think, with these things, their history does not lend the behavior to that kind of thing. And I know there are people who listen to this that won't agree with that, but it's true.
Because that was in the same exact forest over there in North Carolina. I think it's the Croatian, I'm not sure how to pronounce the word, but that forest is the same forest that all the other Bigfoot activity had been taking place. It's the only reason to maybe kind of start thinking, wow, wait a minute, this is a little unusual. Could it have been an adolescent grabbed them and maybe didn't know what to do with them and let them go? I mean, I don't know.
It is possible. It would have to be a very young one, one that didn't necessarily have.
Or how about a female?
It's unknown. It's really not known. I mean, it is possible. I just think it's unlikely.
Yeah.
Because with the young ones, the adults aren't going to be too far away.
You're right.
Yeah,
but I was, you hear these different stories about the females sometimes taking people back to camp and doing all, and I think that's a bunch of crap.
It is.
But I could also see a woman's, maternal, with a baby. You know what I'm saying? A 3-year-old is so little. Maybe that one there kind of struck me as, if she had lost a baby, or God only knows what could happen. Maybe, because it was awful odd.
The thing I would have to see is, people make these claims, but where's the physical proof around it that shows there was a Sasquatch in the area? I've seen or heard nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, we're talking about a 3-year-old too. So 3-year-olds are prone to make up stories.
Very true, right? And
they are. But they said the kid said a bear, which there's no bears. They said in the area. That's the weird thing. So that's when everybody started guessing. What could that be?
Well, now here's a question too. What sorts of things do the child's parents and other family members and friends talk about when they're around the kid? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What kinds of things are in that child's mind?
Yeah, they're very impressionable at that age.
Sure.
Very impressionable. But, and then, because, don't get me wrong, I mean, I don't think so, but I also, the small part of me starts looking at the way chimpanzees take children in Africa. You know what I mean? And sometimes they'll do that with the children there. And I'm like, how far off are these things to chimpanzees? Are they that much different than, are they like a missing link type of thing in the middle of a human and an ape? You know what I mean?
Well, that's a double-sided sword. Sometimes they will take kids, sometimes they'll kill each other. I mean, you know what I'm saying? There's, without knowing specifics, I'd say first of all, in terms of not jumping to any sort of conclusions, where's the physical proof that there was something in the area to begin with? If there isn't any...
Just other eyewitnesses, right? There really isn't.
Yeah, I mean, and nobody saw anything. You're taking just the things that a 3-year-old said, and people are running 40 miles with it, and you got to step back and say, well, maybe it's one of those things you put in the back of your mind, and if something similar happens that has supporting evidence, maybe you can make the connection, but without that, I'm really hesitant to make any sort of an opinion about it, other than I doubt it, really.
And I doubt this. Well, I was going to say, I kind of question the whole story to begin with, because, I mean, the kid is 3 years old. How do you lose a 3-year-old for that many days? The kid's 3 years old. How fast can he run, and how far can he run away? It doesn't really add up to me.
I mean, that was one of the biggest things. The kid was gone for 3 days, wasn't it? I believe 3 days. They had everybody, the whole town, everything was out. The police, everyone was looking for the kid.
I guess you'd have to actually...
was gone for 3 days.
I guess you'd have to actually see what the police report said.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we don't know if there wasn't some person involved with the kid being gone that many days.
That's true.
Kidnapped, maybe kidnapped, yeah.
Yeah, and the story could have been a bear, or maybe the person was wearing something that, looked furry. I mean, who knows?
Even the person who took him could have coaxed the story for the kid. Sure. Tell him a bear got you. Tell him a bear got you. He said that enough to a 3-year-old. He's going to repeat it.
I mean, you have to look at all these different possibilities, instead of just jumping up and waving the flag and saying Bigfoot did it. Well, we have no idea that that's what happened.
I only go by because I know that was one of the areas that been like a recent real hot spot. I mean, as far as sightings go, anyway, you know,
right.
There've been quite a few sightings and stuff over there. So I'm like, geez, maybe I don't know, because I do believe the population of these things are exploding.
Oh yeah, they are.
They seem to be in areas that they never used to be in. Well, I mean, they're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you think that's from? Why do you think that you think it's just our habits, the way we've changed, and we haven't hunted? Why?
Well, there's a combination of reasons. The biggest one has to do with logging, and Brian and I've talked about this in the past a few times, but I'll go over it again. The biggest reason is a huge food supply. Okay, and why that connects to logging is when we look back at, post World War II up through the early 80s, when logging was booming and they were clear cutting all over the place. What happens to an area that's been clear cut? You get a light is hitting that forest floor, or the former forest floor, for the first time in many, many years, so all the leafy plants have a chance to flourish. And when there's a ton of food, that's food for deer and things like that, then those populations explode. Then you get the predator populations that explode in accordance with those animal species exploding. So, and these things are predators, so that's why we've got so many. And I suspect that's the reason logging came to a screeching halt when it did, and they made up reasons like the spotted owl and whatever. But it was a little bit late, too late, to put the cork back on the bottle because the genie was out. So now we're seeing this proliferation of these things all over the place.
I mean, do you think they would eventually? It's obviously, I know there's anything you don't like to talk about this as far as them covering this stuff up. I think you get information from your Mr. X there, about telling you stuff that's going on or whatever inside. But I just don't understand why. I guess it is all the money, but the cover up is. I mean, people's lives are at stake.
Yeah, I really don't want to talk about that on the radio, so we can discuss that privately. I know people always get mad. Well, you say this stuff, but there's a reason I don't say it, and it is to protect people.
Yeah.
Will, just on that, what Dave was talking about, and what you were just talking about the proliferation, there is a respected scientist out there who claims that there are only 50 Sasquatches in the entire state of Idaho, and the same with other states as well. And I think that he's greatly underestimating that number.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, how
that's ridiculous. That's not even a healthy population of anything. That wouldn't be.
My sources. Now we look back at what Grover Krantz said years ago. His estimation, and that was just based on, I believe it was all the information that Green and those people collected. He estimated around 10,000. The numbers are much larger than that. In the 50s, now this comes from my sources, that were the folks who actually deal with this stuff. They said in the 1950s, on the continent, the population was around 50,000. And for a viable breeding population, and we talked to our anthropologist a couple of weeks ago about this, you have to have a number around that size for there to be a viable breeding population. When the effects of logging really kicked in, with all this proliferation of food sources, the number, and I didn't get a specific number, I just got a ballpark number. They said 6 figures. So, we don't really know exactly what that means. It means a lot. You have at least double the number of what it was in the 1950s, and I suspect much higher than that.
You, in all the years you've been, 40 years for you? 45 years you've been?
46 years.
46 years you've been studying these. Have you come to any conclusions? Is this a separate hominid, or is this a Neanderthal type? What is this thing?
No.
What was in my yard?
It's not something that... and this is funny enough. Again, we talked to John, our forensic anthropologist, and he made an interesting statement. because everybody thinks they're, we're always told this stuff about the family tree, and he said that's not accurate. He said it's more like bushes. Now, if you picture you have different family groupings. Now, way back at some point, there's probably some connections, but it's too far back to really make some big leaps between species, if you understand where I'm going. There's a lot of things in the fossil record, and they always label them either pre-human or all these different things. They really don't know. They have enough characteristics physically that put them into certain groups, okay? But they'll form opinions on that, and usually it's for papers and things like that, and then that's kind of what sticks, because a lot of people, may not challenge those ideas. They sort of agree with them and let them go. There's a lot of things, a lot of fossil hominids, and we're talking 3, 4, 5, 7 million year old creatures that, for all intents and purposes, the characteristics resemble what could be the ancestors of these things. So these things are certainly older than we are, because native people said they were here when they came to these lands. These things were already here.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think that they came over the land bridge over Alaska through Siberia that way?
There's a lot of debate today whether there was a land bridge or not. I mean, scientists are always up in the air. They always want to upend things. However man got here is probably how these things got here well before man did. So, and primates have moved out of Africa and East Asia a number of times in waves, they say. So these things were probably one of them early waves. We were like the last wave, or one of the last waves that came out. So we're a fairly newcomer. 10 million years ago, there was around 50. Was it 50 or 50,000? I'd have to go back and look. They called it. There was a paper about primates in that time period, and they said it was truly the planet of the apes at that time, because there were primates everywhere around the planet. So when you look at things like the Gigantopithecus, if something like that, which is actually quite a bit larger than the Sasquatch, existed, then why couldn't the Sasquatch exist? They know there was at least 7 other hominid species. We're the only surviving member, supposedly. It's very likely these things are also, because they have a morphology that's a little more similar to us than apes. Now, that doesn't mean they're human, so I don't want people mistaking that. There's a lot of things that could be similar. They could be hominids, could be extremely different than us, both in behavior and physiology, things like that. So.
Now, you said that there's 4 different species of these things, right?
4 types.
4 different types.
4 types.
4 types. Do you think that they came over as one type and changed and evolved differently, or I think they all came over differently?
Well, what's interesting is you look at Asia and Australia and places like that in the world. There are 2 main groupings in all them places. So I almost want to think that maybe there were 2 different ones. And they may not be completely different species. They're probably the same species, but they're different varieties. In other words, it might be as subtle as something like the difference between chimps and orangutans or something like that.
Maybe weather too, climate changing somehow.
Well, there's physical barriers that separate, members of a species. Our own species, we have a lot of variation amongst ourselves. And it's very similar for other animals and these things also. So separation, of a breeding or the gene pool, you're going to get different things develop in one as opposed to another one. So that's kind of what's going on.
If you get one of those, a sorry about that, Will. I was just going to say, if you ever get one of the old Ice Age maps where they thought the Ice Age, went through, whether it was Alaska that way, it also was solid ice, like through Iceland over to like Ireland, England, over to there. So it's not probably out of the possibility that something could have come this way.
Well,
something could have come that way, like the Clovis.
And there's also been more than one Ice Age. Everybody thinks the Ice Age. The Earth has been cold a number of times. So.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. Like the Clovis people who supposedly came over that way.
Hey, well, speaking about it, that they're not humans, I came across this one group online, and they're like, "Oh, well, you better not shoot one because you could be charged with manslaughter if they ever catch you."
I don't know how people say. Now, when you look at how, we'll just talk about primates, but I think all animals are pretty much the same way. They're categorized by morphology, which means their physical characteristics. So when you get members, you have certain number of characteristics that defines one species, and you get something that's similar. Let's say chimps, gorillas, orangutans, humans, what have you. We all share some similar characteristics, and I think, isn't it chimps that have 98% similar DNA to ours? Does that make them human? No, it doesn't, because there's a lot of that. 2% is a huge difference.
Hundreds of thousands of mitochondria DNA, right? Hundreds of thousands.
Sure.
People don't realize how much of a difference that is. It's a lot.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of stupid, really, to say, oh well, these things are human when these things are 7-8 feet tall, can weigh 1,000+ pounds. They walk differently than we do. There's a lot of physical characteristics that are very different than us, so they're not a human.
Yeah. I came across this article, this from, I forget the journal offhand, but they estimate, and they had a formula for how they did this too, looking at footprints and so forth, but they estimate that the average Sasquatch weighs 658 pounds for an adult. Does that sound about right?
No, they're way off.
It's more than that?
Because the one thing they can make all those numbers, they don't know the bone and muscle density.
Mm-hmm.
And I was told what it was. I'm not going to say it on here, but I was told what it was by my sources, which makes their weight much greater than what those estimates are.
Yeah, I know that Lloyd Pye, when he did his old shows, he used to talk about the density in the bone was basically double what a human's is.
It's actually
so the weight.
It's actually more than that.
Is it really? Yeah. I think we spoke about that too. These things are in excess of 1,000 pounds guaranteed. These things are heavy.
Yeah, the first two that I saw, I know the first one I saw. The younger one was lighter because it was smaller, but the first one had to be at least 800 pounds, probably more than that.
Well, Will, on that note too, I was going to ask, because they also say that for a lot of the sightings that they have, that the chest is not just wide, but for a lot of the sightings that they come across, it's deep. Yeah, they say it's barrel chested. It's almost as deep as it is wide.
Yeah, the one I saw, it was every bit from the front of the chest to the back, every bit of 3 feet thick.
Yeah, that's way disproportionate to what a human's would be, of course.
Absolutely.
And they also state, I mean, I guess there's no way to know this for sure, but they state that the average lifespan would be about 36 years. I mean, that would have to be a guess. I don't know how they could figure that out.
Yeah, they're guessing. I mean, and again, that's something we talked to John about. And his estimate, I think, was what I was saying before. I mean, it could be up around 50, 60 years. You have to look at other anthropoid species in the wild to see what their lifespan is. So,
yeah, because I think that would be around what a gorilla's is, but I know that monkeys are a lot less than that, and I know that chimpanzees are a lot more than that, and orangutans are a lot more than that. They can get up to 50 years, so that would be a guess on their part. But
yeah, I mean, everybody wants to. I mean, I understand they want to understand the particulars, But there's just a lot of things that are really nothing more than guesswork.
Yeah.
And the things I talk about, if I say something specific, it's because I was told through these sources that know about this stuff. So, if I say something, I'm quoting them. I'm trying not to guess. I mean, if I'm guessing something, I'm going to say that's my guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's a question that
the gorillas. I was just going to say the gorillas you were just talking about. Or what are they? 5.5 feet tall normally, a gorilla.
Yeah, and they can get up. There was one in John. I think it was John Green's books. One of his books, or maybe it was Sanderson's. I can't remember. Somebody many years ago, there was a picture of a gorilla, and it was huge. There was a man sitting next to it, and I think they said the gorilla was something like 600 pounds. It was enormous. And they said something about if the legs were proportionate to the body, you'd have a Sasquatch because the upper body was enormous.
That's where I was going with that. I mean, you figure that if the average, let's just say the average size, from the ones I've read anyway, I could be wrong, but 5.5 feet or so for a male, the weight of those things are like 450 pounds. That's only at 5.5 feet. What does a 9-foot Sasquatch must weigh? My God.
Oh, yeah.
It's got to be so much more.
Tremendous.
So much more.
Yeah, and Will, how many calories do you think they consume a day? Because this article states that they cite something called Kleber's Law, and they say that small adults of one species respire more per unit of weight than large adults of another species because of a larger fraction of their body mass consists of structure rather than reserve, and blah, blah, blah. What they're basically saying, though, is that the Sasquatch might eat a lot less than we think it does. They estimate around 5,000 calories a day. Do you think it's a lot more than that, or does that sound right?
Well, this is one of those things I'm going to quote from my sources. They need, on the average, a minimum of 15,000 calories a day. And when you listen to the Indians talk, they always say they're always eating, they're always hungry.
Just think of how much that is. That's incredible.
Well, now what's a bodybuilder take in daily? Around 3,500?
Probably more than that, I think.
Probably more than that. So it's not out of the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not out of the question with them. From the size of the thing I saw, I don't doubt it. I mean, this thing was fat, too. I mean, it had a gut on it. It wasn't fat, but it had a gut on it, the one that I saw. I mean, it wasn't thin, you know what I mean? It was definitely eating well, let's put it that way.
Right.
So, I mean...
I was going to say, what's funny is that if you're familiar with Michael Phelps, the swimmer, there was a report, he denies that it's this many, but there was a report that when he was training, he was eating up to 10,000 calories a day because of all the energy that he was burning. So, and he's not fat. So maybe that 15,000 is accurate.
Yeah, and it's going to vary depending on the size, and I suppose even between the different types, because I was talking to a friend that I work closely with in the subject, in our field work and stuff, and we were discussing. He actually had a couple sightings. One was the same type that I've seen, the type 1s, and the other one was a different. And he talked about, the one being barrel-chested and, almost like a chunk of a log, which is the only way you can describe something like that that's that big. It's just, it's almost straight from top to bottom, and they're massive. And then there's another variety that's a little more athletic looking and thinner. And there's a difference between those two in terms of environment where they're sort of acclimated to, or maybe they've developed to survive better in one type of climate than another. The ones like you see in the Patterson Sasquatch, that one very thick muscles, very very stocky looking. That one, those types are more adapted to a very mountainous terrain, so and they're built for it. The other type are built more for flatter areas, and are more designed for running, where the other ones are more designed for climbing, both up and down hills. And it's an adaptation to living in that type of an environment. So,
yeah.
In your studies there too, Will, through 46 years, what are the common what berries do they seem to always be around? There always seems to be this one particular berry that they are like always sighted around, and I don't know if it's because people are picking them or they have a taste for these berries.
Well, they'll eat all kinds of berries, but it just depends on what's in season, and they supplement their diet. They're going to eat the most that's beneficial for calories, which is meat, but they will supplement their diets with pretty much anything else. I mean, like I said, I found
they're probably foraging all the time. Sure.
Yeah. So and if people are out picking the berries, then that's the situation they're going to see them in.
Yeah.
And Will, that's telling.
I don't know what the wild blueberries are called. Something out in where I guess out west there. I forget the name of them. There's a wild type of blueberry. I forget what it's called, but it looks like a blueberry.
Well, there's huckleberries. They're not blue, but they're.
I think that's what they were.
Yeah, they're red, but there is a blueberry. I mean, south of Mount St. Helens, that area is completely blanketed with them.
Yeah, and it seems like that's a lot of sightings when people are either out with mushrooms or they're out with the blueberry, the berries picking. They're just sighting after sighting comes from that area.
I think just having yourself in the environment where these things are, and if they're, supplementing their diet with these other things, which they do, that's where you're going to see them.
And Will, that was telling that you said that they're always eating too, because that was going to be one of my questions, because there are some animals such as sharks, not to say that Sasquatches are related to sharks or anything like that, but sharks do not eat unless they're hungry. You can put fish right next to them that they'll normally eat, but they only eat when they're hungry. But you're saying that Sasquatches are eating all the time?
Well, and that's what I've been told by native peoples a number of times, different areas, that they're always hungry, always looking for food. And it makes sense. I mean, if you have that high caloric intake and if you're on the move quite a lot, you're going to be hungry a lot. So,
yeah. Hey, well, switching gears a little bit, I was going to ask, whatever happened to the Goldhammer family? Did you ever stay in touch with them after your interviews with them and your research?
I did for a while. Well, young Nick had some issues late, in his early adult life, and then Nick Sr. and Brenda weren't actually married, and they split up. And I'm actually friends with their daughter Tanya on Facebook, so I don't really talk to them much, and I don't know what happened to some of them, but they moved on with their lives like everyone does.
And did they sell that property and after the whole incident?
As far as I know, I don't believe anyone lives there anymore. I mean, other people live there now, but it's not them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a question for you. Have you ever? I'm sure you've heard different Native Americans call, Sasquatch and all the different names to these things. Have you ever heard of the phrase "chickly cuddly"?
I'm not familiar
for
with
one of these things. So I was reading an article on early settlers in South Carolina. The locals would call it, the local English, people from Europe would call them yahoos, while the Native Americans would call them a chickly cuddly. So I thought that was a little weird.
That's interesting. It depends on the language.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there are
who knows too, maybe that being referenced to English. Who knows how that changed,
There are many, many, many names for these things.
Hey, Will, how did they get the name boogers from people in the South, like Alabama and Georgia?
That's a good question. I never heard the source of that term. I'm not really sure.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's true or not, Brian, but that saying that I've heard was the booger man, and that's what it got changed to other people as time went on. It went like to the north, it became the boogeyman, but it became the first phrasing was the booger man. That's what I've heard. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've heard.
And it could very well be. I think there's a lot of things that we have, and Brian and I've talked about this too. When you look at, and again, these things have been around before we were. So, you look at the book Them and Us, that's a good example or interesting example. But, things that I've had Native friends tell me about their past relationship with these things. I've never heard of a good relationship with, peoples that have been around a long time with these things. And natives say that they pushed them out of the hunting areas when they come into their the lands where they live, and the exchange was not a good one. And typically that's why these things live up in the mountains where they are, and the natives lived where they did. But
like that one case, that story, how true that is, the one in Oklahoma. They, I guess they went riding after them with the horses. I forget the whole story, but that they went after them because there were a bunch of children missing or people missing from the village, and they all got together and went riding and finally found them. And
it's interesting.
One of the more famous ones.
There was, I redid my book Haunted Valley, and when I did a little digging about that area, there was, and I'm trying to look for this. In 1901, the name Yakult comes from a Klickitat word. It's Yalakolb, or however it's pronounced, but it means haunted place or place of evil spirits. And there was a native story, and I'll just kind of read over this. It said that Native Americans have long told a story about a group of children that vanished along a path through the woods that surrounded the town of Yakult. There was a historian of the area, and said in the fall, in the hills around Yakult, the story goes that the kids went berry picking and the spirit took them all. And that whole generation disappeared. So it was attributed to these things when they were talking about Haunted Valley. Yakult means Haunted Valley, and it was attributed directly to these creatures taking kids, and people.
I know you've talked about this before on other shows, but it's amazing. If people go to these different, like your the Haunted Creek or Devil's Creek and all these different places, these Devil's Mountain, Devils, all these names that were given by Native Americans, a lot of them come from these things.
Right.
It's amazing.
Jersey Devil.
And you ever notice they're not very nice names?
No, exactly. They're not exactly what do you, the old saying you guys used to say, the violinist or whatever in the woods, the no.
Well,
what was that saying?
It referring to the people?
No, the old show you used to do, that you guys used to call it something. The
was that the flute players?
The flute players. That's it. The flute players. They're not exactly the flute players in the yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to pick on people, but I think there's a lot of people who everybody has their beliefs, and I don't know what some of these beliefs are based on. I even have a couple of friends who are of this mindset, and I'd always just kind of have to bite my lip a little bit, when they'd be talking about their theories about this stuff, but you have to go back and look at the body of material on the subject. And I don't mean, what people are saying out there. I mean the reports and things like that.
And they don't. I know exactly where you're going with that. And they don't. They just have an opinion of it when they haven't gone through what there is to go through.
Right. Now, you've done a lot of digging. What's your opinion? It kind of backs up what you saw, doesn't it?
Forget what I saw. There's no question. If I just went looking, and especially those old articles, no question. Too many people, like, what do they say, in a court of law, you'd be convicted.
Right.
Anybody that brought all the evidence that we have and the witnesses that are out there, I'm talking the good witnesses, the people that are, not looking for attention or whatever. Not that they're not all good, but you know what I mean. The ones that are low key, don't want to tell anybody about it, but you get it out of them. Whoa, they had something go happen. Something happened to them.
Correct.
Too many people. There'd be a conviction every time.
Yeah.
Well, David, here's something to consider. Your testimony, if you witness a murder, your eyewitness testimony could send somebody to the electric chair. But thousands and thousands and thousands of eyewitness accounts of this creature aren't enough to convince many people. So,
and
I tell people that I know personally, I tell them, look, have you ever known me to lie? Have you ever known me to make up stories? I own a business. I'm not in it to throw stories around at you. I'm telling you something. I'm telling you what I saw. I tell them like that. They have their belief. That's it. Nothing's going to change it. Whatever.
And
it's amazing.
I'll tell you something. I was discussing this a couple of years ago with a friend of mine who's he was a retired attorney at the time. Now he's back working for the state of Montana as a judge. And through our discussions, we talked about evidence. And, from somebody in his profession who pretty well knows what he's talking about, what constitutes evidence. Because you always hear the question, it drives me crazy. Well, if these things are real, how come we don't have any evidence? There's lots of evidence. Like you just mentioned, eyewitness testimony can lock somebody up or execute them. It doesn't have to be direct, physical evidence. We watch Dateline all the time, and show after show after show, it seems like they have very flimsy evidence. And even though, to me at least, watching a show, there's a doubt a lot of times, whether, if you were sitting in the jury box, there's a lot of times I see these things and I think, geez, I based on what the law says, I don't think I would feel comfortable with saying
send a man away for the rest of his life over that, right?
Guilty. So, but it happens time and again. And a lot of it's on witness testimony. That's really all they have a lot of times for these circumstantial cases. And, even accounting for whatever percentage of stories that are hoaxed, even if you had a half a dozen that were real, that's evidence. Not to mention things like, the footprints and everything else. There's a lot of different things that are evidence. So for people to make that statement, well, there's no evidence, that's just total nonsense.
There's only the evidence that they allow out there. The higher powers that be, when they want something out there, they don't want something out there, whether it be going into different subjects like UFOs, anything that they don't want out there, you're never going to get. When they control what's the old adage? When they control the information, they control what goes in and out and what people believe. Believe me when I tell you. Mm-hmm. I didn't believe these things, Will, until I was 38 years old. Not that almost, maybe a little. I'm 50. Yeah, about 12 years ago, about 38 years old. I would have thought you were nuts too.
Yeah.
I would have thought you would have talked. I would have said, I don't. I didn't believe it either. If I didn't see what I saw, I never would have believed it. And I certainly would have saw Finding Bigfoot and believed it. Watching those characters run around and I saw one time they had a disco ball outside.
I heard that.
and you know what they said? They said the Sasquatch is going to want to be curious.
Oh no!
Really? Just like it's like a deer will want to be curious too. Really? You think? I don't think he's going to be curious.
Again, you have to go back. You have to go back and look at what other wild primates do in their environments. It's things like, any object you put out in their environment, they're keenly aware of all the things that are in their area and what should and shouldn't be there. Same goes true with chimps, gorillas, so on. When things are put in their area, most often they will be extremely wary of it and shy away from it. They will stay clear of whatever man-made object is in the place. Now, sometimes you'll see things on television. Those are rarities. If a primate approaches something man-made, usually it spooks them. They'll stay the hell away from it. So the Sasquatch is not going to come and ooh and ah over a disco ball.
Basically, you're notifying them, here we are, run as fast as you can.
That's exactly it.
Because that's basically what you're telling them.
They view us as a threat and will steer clear of situations like that.
Yeah. Where we bring destruction where we go. I mean, let's face it. They will probably watch us knock down their forests. They probably watch planes flying overhead, and they probably know enough.
And it's more than that.
They're clear of what we,
It's more than that. If you go back to ancient times when there was a great deal of friction between humans and these things, and apparently we got the upper hand and drove them into seclusion, that would be a pretty good reason for staying away from human beings.
There's a young guy, and I would never toot anybody's besides yourself, because I like you're one of the more honest ones. That's the only reason I actually came to you with what happened with me. But there's a guy that does a YouTube channel, Bob Gimlin, a young guy that does a show. He's good. He's so thorough. Have you ever heard any of his stuff?
I've seen it pop up once or twice.
Let me tell you, he's very thorough what he does. I like listening to him. You know what I mean? I think he does a good job. He never gives you an answer what he thinks it is, but he kind of sways you in a direction. What do you think it is? You know what I mean? That type of thing. It's pretty good.
I kind of like Thinker Thunker on there. He's pretty good.
Yeah, there's a couple of them out there. We lost Lloyd Pye. I liked him. I told you that. I liked Lloyd Pye.
I actually got to know him. An interesting guy.
Yeah, he seems like an interesting guy, but he also seemed very good with the subject. You know what I mean? He seemed to have a pretty good grasp on why he thinks they would be here. I mean, he might not have been all right on everything he was going with, but I mean, I like the way he puts it with the panda bear. Now, we found out about a panda bear, what we thought, the reports came out of China in, 1850. How long did it take us? 60 years to actually get one, shoot one, and bring it out. You know what I mean?
Well, the gorilla,
and you hear a story like that.
The gorilla wasn't officially recognized as existing until, I think, around 1907.
I know there was a Connecticut man, too, that shot him. It was a doctor or a dentist or something that shot one and brought the head out of a gorilla. I had read the story about the guy. An amazing story. I guess you want to hear the weird part about the gorilla? Did you ever read the story about the first one that was shot from that, the one I'm talking about, from the guy in Connecticut?
It was a long time ago.
He says in this, and I don't know if he's just trying to make a good story, I don't know, but he says when he shot it, it flung itself off a cliff away from him. And when we went down there to retrieve the body, they couldn't find it. You know what I mean? It was not that it ran away or nothing, but it probably smashed into a million pieces, because he said it fell off a cliff. He said that while they were leaving and he thought he wasn't going to be able to get one, they actually ran into another one and he shot one. And it was too big for them to carry out, so they just took the head, chopped the head off and took the head back with them. And then boom, it was known this is the new primate in Africa.
Wow.
Amazing. But the story about the panda, when people say, well, why wouldn't we, that we control so much of America, and, we would have found these things by now. In China, they knew that the panda bear was there. It took us 60 years to actually go in and actually get one to bring it out. And here's an animal, like Lloyd Pye used to always say, that's dumb. It's not exactly smart if you ever watch them in captivity. They can't mate, they have trouble mating, all the different issues with them. You know what they eat, so they're not getting far away from the bamboo. They live in the day, and it took us that long to get one.
Right.
Why? Because they're in their own element. What do you think these things are at nighttime, in their own element, smarter than a panda bear? How hard do you think it's going to be for us to go out there and actually get one,
Oh, yeah.
Not that it hasn't happened, but just in a normal situation, how much, they definitely must outsmart humans out in that terrain,
Oh, yeah.
They're getting away. Every one of these stories I'd written down, because I thought we were going to do a different show than we ended up doing. I'd written down a whole 8 pages of all the old stories, of just every single one that was all the same. They look like this. They're tall. They're almost all. And I've named all the different states.
Why don't you go ahead and talk about some of those?
All right, here's one. I told you about that Chunker, whatever the name of that one was there. Here's a newspaper article from the Santa Monica, November 1908, Santa Monica newspaper. Wild man of mountain robs sprung traps and took animals. I guess sprung some traps. And commissary of supplies, peculiar footprints left behind by a man-ate animal as he flees his would-be captor. Article goes on to say, it was based on a woman named Bertrand Bassey, who was working for the construction workers, I guess, out in Santa Monica, out that way. And I guess she'd be getting reports from these different contractors out there. And she goes on to say that the frequent losses of, they had supply houses were broken into, and certain just food broken and taken out of there with huge footprints and stuff like that. I guess a couple times they had seen what it was. I'll read it says here, by the sight of the brown being fashioned after the form of a man approaching the store, the thing was on all fours. So here's a Bigfoot approaching the store. I guess what the article goes on to tell you about, they started staking it out to see who was breaking into the store, who was taking their meat out of there. And approaching the store, the animal was on all fours and devoid of any clothing or such coverings as might have been provided by the skins of animals. It had a human face covered with hair. The thing gave a guttural yell, rose upright on its hind legs, and ran away into the forest. The tracks were up to 2 feet long in some of the measurements on that one. I mean, there's a Santa Monica newspaper. Here's one, the Lincoln Star. This is an article from 1922, Lincoln, Nebraska Star. They're talking about an article in the Colorado Rockies. Story of a wild man, half beast, half man in the Colorado Rockies. Lincoln Star, 1922. Eyewitnesses describe a strange, hairy creature leaps across the waste places on all fours and stands upright and subsists on raw flesh of fowls of animals. Its body is gaunt. They used some strange language back then. Its body is gaunt and covered with hair. Its eyes gleam with ferocity, and its utter shrieking yell. Shaggy brows. I mean, that might be that brow that they always talk about with the ancient man. I forget what it's called there, but I guess that brow, the big brow that sticks out on all on all gorillas.
Yeah, the brow ridge.
The reported hybrid. Yeah, the brow ridge. That's what I think they're referring to there. The reported hybrid human ape has invaded barnyards, killed chickens, robbed hens, and fled at the first sight of a human. Amazing stories, but they're all the same. Here's a good one. This is probably one of the better ones. New York Times article, January 6, 1894. The residents of Dover are excited over a sudden appearance of a wild man near the town. He was seen in the Mellon Homestead area of town. After uttering bizarre and threatening sounds at them, ran away into the nearby woods. A search party was sent out, but the man-like creature could not be found. A few days later, he was seen again running through the woods of a nearby town. No clothing, just hair head to toe. Another party was sent out. Here's a good one here. Another party was sent out with dogs and men. 6 men, 6 dogs were sent out. They actually surrounded this wild man. He grabbed one of the dogs and killed it and made his escape, and is still at large. Fascinating. I mean, you got to figure, what kind of dogs are these people going out with? They're not going out with little dogs. This thing grabbed the dog and killed it probably almost instantly and ran away. Amazing articles, though. Some of these ones that I went through here, I don't want to read them all for you, but anyway, that's what I was looking up. I find it amazing that the people that you would trust, I think you trust most of them. You got to remember back in the day, Will, when I was a kid too, probably when you were a kid, we didn't lock our doors.
No.
There wasn't things like we ever really trusted. It was your word. If you ever said you were going to do something, you did it. Things are so much different now. I take the word of these people. These people are calling it the way they see it most of the time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So if these people were seeing the same thing that we're getting reports to now, they're there. They're out there, people. They are there.
Brian, did you have anything you wanted to bring up?
Oh, going back to what David was talking about a little bit earlier about bodies disappearing, did you ever hear this story? Because this comes up a lot in articles that I've seen. But in 2000 or so, in Oklahoma, there was a farmer who at first he had bangs on his house, on the side of his house. Then 30 of his chickens went missing, and deer meat was taken from his farm. And then he and his brother later saw a creature, and it was growling at them, and they shot it and killed it. And then supposedly, he said immediately 3 others came and took the body.
Right.
And the next day, they came by and attacked the house continuously. And then finally, the family just had enough and they moved away.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever hear about that story?
Yes, I have heard that. I've heard a couple of similar ones too.
Oh, there's others like that?
Jacko wasn't Jacko one of those types of stories too, where they caught one?
They caught him,
and he got away, or
and that was. Yeah. I want to.
And they said he had the strength of like 6 men or something. They were saying that he was only an adolescent. It was a small one.
Right.
He was stronger than like 6 men.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I was looking at that story recently, and this sort of goes with the markings that we find. You know, the twisted and snapped trees. Yeah, Jacko was a small one. I think he was only around 5 feet tall, and I think they said 127 pounds. They actually weighed it. So it was an adolescent, and it was kind of comical because it had been seen around the train tracks near where they caught it for some time. And they
dropped a rock on its head, didn't they?
They dropped a rock on its head. Yeah, one of the guys climbed up above it and dropped. And there's some technological feats there, huh? But
yeah.
They said that it would grasp a stick in a very peculiar manner, and the way it would break it by twisting it. And you know, this was I believe it was 1882 that happened. Just the details in some of these stories were what fascinate me, because those details, we can find them time and time again through other accounts.
They're rearing their ugly heads now, aren't they? Yeah, they're rearing their ugly heads now. And then I think there was another story, too, about a train hitting, I guess back in the day, trains hit the Sasquatch several times. One of the times they actually grabbed it, put it on the back of the train. While they were waiting to get going again, a group of other Sasquatch came supposedly and grabbed it off of the back and took off with it.
That could very well be.
I read that story. Yeah, I read that story on there. So one of those old 1800 stories when they first put the railroad tracks in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those people. I'll tell you what. People that would know, those people, the ones that were building the railroad tracks through the Rocky Mountains back in those days, those people would know.
Right.
Because those people were living every day up in those mountains when that was probably the first time they'd seen white man, over in those areas, these things. So I bet they must have came in contact with them all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure they did.
Well, go
ahead, Brian.
Just going back to your very first encounter. Of course, you were a teen then, but given the exact same circumstances, but instead of being a teen, if you were your age now in 2019, if you had the same identical experience, would you have reacted differently? Would you have done the same thing, shoot your gun up in the air and then run away? Or would you have possibly done something different? Would you stay longer, or would you shot creatures? Or
I think if it happened now, I probably would have crapped myself, but I don't know. Knowing what I know now, I would have gotten out of there much quicker.
Maybe not even gone in to begin with, right?
No, I wouldn't have gone in to begin with because, I know a few things now that I certainly didn't know anything then. But I mean, even in my early years doing this stuff, being involved, my thinking was very different than it is now. Now it's based on much more knowledge that I've been given. So, it makes me a lot more frightened of these things now than I was back then.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, have you ever seen one of these things?
No, luckily no.
Well, let me ask you a question. This is a question that I ask myself every day. Do you live in an area roughly where there's any kind of like thick woods, whether the sightings there or not, just like woodsy area? Is there any woods there where you live?
No, not here.
No? Okay. Because I live still where there's some woods. And I take the dog, and I find myself never going by there. Everybody thinks I'm nuts. I can't even go by the woods anymore. And I know there's nothing in this. I know these woods aren't thick enough for anything, but I just don't want to be near them at night. I don't want to be anywhere near them, knowing what I know.
I still go out, of course, and conduct field work, but I'm a lot better prepared now. And, of course, not going alone. And I tell you, the people I go with, I don't get too far from them. I make sure everybody stays, within sight of one another. And a lot of times we're armed, so...
I have a gun, but if I'm not carrying it, and I just got my puppy with me, I'm walking in these areas, and I'm like, I don't want to be near here. It's something about it that night. I think I told you one other time. I emailed you too about the flashbacks that come. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, thinking like a certain thing of that moment. You know what I mean? Just seeing that moment again, I wake up.
I tell you what,
I don't wake up in a cold sweat, crying or nothing, but I just wake up.
I've woke up periodically, not anywhere near as much as I did when I was younger, but have certainly still have nightmares. And a lot of times it'll be, my mind is manufacturing circumstances, but and an example is what I traded my Jeep in a couple of years ago for a Dodge Challenger. It's my retirement car, when I retire from work. And but when I had the Jeep, I wanted one, and I'll buy another one, but I wanted one with a soft top so I could take the soft top up, because you can hear things better with the top off a vehicle. And I remember this dream, being up in one of my research areas with the Jeep and the top off, and nearly being grabbed or being chased by one of these things on the road. I've been through these areas many, many times, and usually we just see bear up there. Of course, these things are in the area, but it's funny how your brain will do things like that, or be in a situation where you're vulnerable to these things, and we are. You know what I see, Will? I see all the time in my dreams. I see him looking in my windows. I could have swear I do double takes. I look at the window, then I do a double. It's my imagination now. I'm always looking now. After that time, now I'm just like, I don't know, I'm changed. Right.
I mean, I'm damaged. I'm damaged goods.
It does change you.
I can't ever express to anybody enough. I can't. Swimming over the top of a shark, playing with a tiger, doesn't do the feeling. Something about when it looks at you, it's smart. It's thinking. What you know what I mean? It's not a smart human, but it's smart though. It's putting all the thoughts together. What it wants to do with you. An animal just acts. A lot of times instinctively. I truly believe these things are a little deeper than that. And they're devious. And that's where that booger man comes from. That's what freaks me out so much when I think about it, is this is something that knows what they're going to do. And the way that they usually kill everybody. Here, who knows if it's true, but it's a story.
And
what do? They pop their head off them.
And these things are very vindictive.
Yeah, and David, I was going to ask you, did it give you any expression? Did it show its teeth, or did it growl at you?
Its mouth was partially open. Its teeth were bright yellow, like a dark color. They weren't white. They weren't like nice pearly whites. They were colored. I don't know if it was from biting the animal or what, but they were like a darkish yellow. They were open almost like he's breathing. When somebody's like, well, if you run and they're breathing with their mouths open, that's what he was doing. And the only difference was he had canines you could see. He had canines, this thing. His canines weren't like a tiger's canines, but they were definitely bigger than the other teeth.
Yeah, that's our type 2s.
And when I tell you, too, I would have, if I saw this to Patty, if anybody ever gave me a choice in a dream to walk up, I would walk up to Patty and shake her hand compared to what I saw. You know what I mean? Go look at people when they go look at that particular one that we're talking about, then and us, or them and us. Look at what that looks like. Imagine some longer hair over the face. That's what I saw in my yard. And if I'm looking at that, then go look at a picture of Patty. Not that that's much better, but believe me, it doesn't look the same. Mm-hmm. And this thing is a creature like out of some of the. You could watch the scariest movies you watch on TV, and nothing looks like this thing looked. Like I think I email all the time. What do I say to you? Monsters are real, Will.
Right.
Right. And they are from what I saw.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, David, did it have a conical head, like a cone-shaped head?
I don't think I didn't notice that. No, I didn't notice. It was nothing that I noticed. I know I've thought of that 1,000 times with all these reports. Did I notice that? It was not something that I noticed. It may have, but like I said, when I shined the flashlight, I shined it on its face. The first I opened it, I didn't have the flashlight on. I walked around the house with the flashlight off, and then almost like flashed it like an idiot. Gotcha, like that. Flashed it in his face. It immediately started closing its eyes from the bright of the light, and it turned to look. When it turned to look at me, it started closing its eyes a little bit, like squinting, looking at me a little bit with its mouth open like that. I quickly shined the flashlight on what he was holding. There was the deer. I went back to his body where the deer was, back to his body. I saw his gut a little bit. I looked up and I ran. I think I even left the flashlight in the front yard. It didn't make it to the house with me. That's how fast I was trying to get out of there. Like I said, you wouldn't believe how fast a white man could run, because boy, oh boy, did I run. Man.
Will, in your experience...
It's just...
Oh, I was going to ask, Will, in your experience, what percentage of the reports of them do have cone-shaped heads? Is most of them, or?
Yeah, most of them do, but there are plenty of them that don't. And I was thinking about this recently. I was looking at gorillas, and typically the male gorillas have the sagittal crest and the females don't. But that's not really the case with the Sasquatch. Some do, some don't. I'm not sure what the difference is. I'll have to ask John about that, what his thoughts are in terms of physiology, but we get a mixture.
Right.
You wonder too that sometimes, like in Mike's situation, where it may have been there, but somebody just didn't notice it. That was the last thing on their mind. Like a phone was the last thing on my mind. A picture or a camera was the last thing on my phone. I could, to be honest with you, Will, like I said, that's why I only told you. I never went anywhere else, told this story to anybody. I could care less who believed me, who would see this video. I don't care. Mm-hmm. I just want to get the hell away from what I saw in that yard. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to, and I don't know how close you were, but I was only maybe 8 feet away from it, 6, 8 feet. I mean, I wasn't very far. I was close.
I was probably
almost where his...
Go ahead.
I was going to say his breath breathing outside, because it had just rained out. If you remember when I told you the story, it had just got done rain. It was like a rainy night. It wasn't raining at the moment, but it rained earlier, and it rained. It was like a cool where when you breathe, your smoke, your breath comes out. Mm-hmm. His breath was almost reaching me. That's how close I was.
That's close.
I didn't smell anything. Yeah, and I didn't smell anything only because I didn't breathe. I don't think I breathed when I went out, when I saw it. I didn't breathe till I got to the back of the house. So, I think it held my breath. I don't know. I probably did, but it's one of those things where, you hear people's stories when they go and shoot one of these things, supposedly, and they say they must have pressed the trigger and they must have done this because they don't remember doing it. Mm-hmm. Something comes over you. It's like brain lock. It's like freeze or something happens.
Right. Isn't that what happened?
And I don't care. So, sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, Will, I was going to say, isn't that what happened with the Minnesota Iceman story? Didn't the guy, he didn't even remember really shooting it?
Well, he did. It just scared the hell out of him. And he took off running.
Oh, okay. And then he came back.
What you read, Brian. I think I read exactly what you did. He goes through the whole story of when he shoots it. He said he must have reached down and he'd done this. He must have done that. He doesn't remember, but as soon as he shot it, he thought of his friends. He thought he'd get in trouble, I guess, because the guys that he was hunting with were his bosses or something at work, and he didn't want them to know that he'd just done this, so I guess he took off.
Well, I'll tell you, that's why he was an Air Force captain, so, being military, and I can tell you, having been military, in the situation where you have a weapon, you'll do things and not think about it because you've been trained so much to operate that weapon.
Muscle memory, absolutely.
Yeah, it's muscle memory, sure.
And I think that's who it was. I think some of his superiors were there with him hunting or something. Somebody in his
I don't
group,
know if it was superiors or friends. I can't remember offhand, without looking at the story, but they were in a different. They went on. We're looking for deer. He was chasing one down and ran across these three things. Two of them took off running. The other one charged him, and he just raised the rifle and shot.
And you listen to the story, what he says they were scooping out the blood and drinking it,
right?
Jumping up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Did you catch all that in the story too?
Yeah.
They were jumping up and down excited while drinking the blood, like scooping blood out of the animal and drinking it.
I'll give you a parallel, not quite an exact parallel, but one of my younger sisters, I've mentioned this a few times about her making fun of me when we found footprints and when I was 14, and I never said anything to the family about seeing these things a couple of years later, but she saw one. She turned a corner one night and drove the car right next to this thing, was standing under a street light, and she said it was kind of jumping up and down. And I just, that was an interesting parallel, that's apparently a behavior these things do, not seen often, but on occasion we'll get a report of that.
Very primate, huh? Very primate.
Very much so.
And another thing, too, that I find in a lot of these reports, a lot of the more thorough, better reports anyway, that we're always giving these things signals. What we do, the way we act, the way we move.
Oh, yeah.
Like a gorilla. If you're out and you see a Bigfoot, I tell you, the last thing you want to do is start pounding on your chest.
Yeah, that wouldn't be too
You will get a response you do not like. Yeah, you will get a response you do not like. And that's a primate response. That's like a threat. That's like a challenge to them, I guess.
Challenge, right.
You're threatening that you're tough and big. Something like that,
Yeah. Well, fellas, we're getting short of time. Any final words before we sign off?
No, I have lots more questions, but we can save those for later. So
okay, yeah,
no big deal.
We do this every week, so we'll have more time for questions. But
I listen to you every week. I listen to you guys every week on there, so I know what you guys are doing, and I appreciate it. It's more knowledge for somebody like myself. I try to. I think you could tell from my knowledge of the subject now is just. Every night when I go to bed, I just sit and I find something new to fall asleep to in the subject, and I fall asleep to it with my headphones on. And I'll just listen to stuff like that just because I know what's happened to me.
And everybody listening, if you've got questions, send them to Brian, and we'll go through them on the show. And Brian, you want to give out your email address?
Yeah, it's just orlandooutsider@yahoo.com.
All right.
And by the way, if anybody has an encounter wants to come on and share their story too, that would be great.
Absolutely.
And remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel also.
Yes, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Well, fellas, and everybody, before we end the talk, be sure to stay tuned. We're going to have another Jim Sower narration as soon as we're finished here. So, fellas, it's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Brian and Dave.
Yeah.
We'll definitely have you back on with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Enjoy the talk. Any more information I can find out, I'll surely push it your way. Whatever I hear, I keep my ears open for you, eyes and ears open for you.
Awesome. Well, fellas, you guys have a good evening, folks. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned for the story coming up.
Nice meeting you, Bri.
Yep, you too.
Welcome. This story is being brought to you by William Jevning and is being narrated by Jim Sower. This is the Jerry Crew story. True Magazine, article by Ivan Sanderson, 1959, Bluff Creek, with Andrew Genzoli photo, 1958. Somewhere in the wilds of California, there is a gigantic creature which walks on its hind legs, leaves huge human tracks, and is scaring the hell out of everybody. What is it? Nobody knows yet. One of the world's foremost zoologists, Ivan T. Sanderson, is also a widely traveled explorer, a veteran animal collector of both known and previously unknown animals. He is a highly respected research scientist. His previous writings include close to a dozen books, the most famous being the classic Living Mammals of the World, and several articles for this magazine. Andrew Ginzoli discusses track imprint with Jerry Crew, October 5th, 1958. Track was found alongside Crew's Caterpillar tractor when he arrived for work on the road construction near Bluff Creek, California. Crew also maintained an equipment storage area near the Louse Camp Bridge. The story. California is a huge state, and an immensely varied one. It is nearly 800 miles long, and it contains everything from barren deserts to lush tropical jungles. It is full of oddities and enigmas, ranging from almost active volcanoes to places where commercially minded properties assure travelers that something has gone wrong with good old reliable gravity itself. California is always good for a story, and the rest of the nation is always willing to indulge in a big laugh at its expense. But there is one story that nobody is laughing at anymore, and it may turn into the biggest thing to come out of that fabulous state since they found something yellow at John Sutter's mill. On August 27th, 1958, a tractor driver named Gerald Crew drove out to his job, which at that time was working with the crew pushing a new lumber access road into the uninhabited and only loosely surveyed territory near the borders of Humboldt and Del Norte counties in northwest California. Jerry Crew is a native of Salyer Township in Humboldt County. He is an active member of the Baptist Church, a teetotaler, and I have talked to enough people up there to state flatly that his reputation for honesty, level-headedness, and just plain common sense is an excellent one. The area where this road was being built is, surprisingly enough, an almost trackless wilderness. It is bordered by the Pacific Ocean on the west and Oregon on the north. Highway 299 runs along its southern border, and it stretches some 130 miles inland to Highway 99. It is crossed by one winding blacktop road and some lesser roads, plus an assortment of logging trails and jeep roads which are used very rarely. While California is thought of as a heavily populated state, this particular section, encompassing some 100,000 square miles, has no known inhabitants at all. Almost anything could be living there, and nobody would be the wiser. If this sounds far-fetched, remember that it was only a relatively few years ago that a Stone Age Indian named Ishi, the last survivor of a race of men long believed extinct, walked out of the forest and surrendered himself to a startled slaughterhouse butcher in Oroville, California. Oroville is only about 65 miles north of the state capital of Sacramento, and a good deal closer to civilization than the remote spot where Jerry Crew found the first evidence of the snowman. Crew's crawler tractor had been left overnight at the head of the new road, about 20 miles north of the point where it branches out from the narrow blacktop that runs through the Hoopa Indian Reservation from Willow Creek to a place with the delightful name of Happy Camp up near the Oregon border. Jerry was an older member of the crew employed by Mr. Ray Wallace, a subcontractor to the firm, Block and Company, which had contracted with the Public Works Department on behalf of the National Park Service to build the road. Jerry is a local man. Most of his fellow workers were also local men, and included, among others, a level-headed young nephew, James Crew, and two experienced loggers of Hoopa Indian origin. The country is extremely mountainous. As a matter of fact, in most places it is almost vertical, so that you can only go up on all fours or down on your bottom. It is clothed in a closed canopy of enormous spruce and other conifers, beneath which is a spreading subcanopy of broad-leafed bushes and small trees, while the ground below is covered with a mat of mosses and beautiful ferns. No matter how high you climb, the dense foliage and mountainous geography make it impossible to see, at best, more than about 4 square miles. The road on which Crew was working crawls laboriously up the face of the western wall of a valley that encloses the stream known as Bluff Creek. All along this mountainous trail there are the stumps of vast trees cut and hauled out, and the great dozers and crawlers clank and roar in the hot summer sunlight as they gnaw their relentless way into the timeless land. Those employed on this work live during the week in camps near the roadhead. Some have their families with them and stay there all week. Others go home to nearby communities on Friday nights and return on the following Monday morning. Jerry Crew's practice was to return to his family over the weekend, leaving his machine parked at the scene of the current operations. He had been on this job for 3 months before the eventful morning of August 27th, 1958. What Crew discovered when he went to start up his cat that morning was a series of footprints that formed a continuous track to, around, and then away from the machine. Such tracks would not have aroused his curiosity under normal circumstances because there were 36 men at that roadhead, and the newly scraped roadbed was covered with soft areas of mud, alternating with patches of loose shale. What did startle him, however, was that these footprints were of a naked foot of distinctly human shape and proportion, but by actual measurement a whopping 16 inches long. His first reaction was to consider them a hoax. Crew had heard of similar tracks found by another road gang working 8 miles north of a place called Corbell on the Mad River earlier in the year. Jim Crew had also mentioned having come across something similar in this area. Being a practical, matter-of-fact person, he felt considerably annoyed that some outsider should try to pull such a silly stunt on him. He told me that he suspected an outsider because, while his fellow workers liked a harmless joke as much as any man, he knew that this job made them far too tired to go clomping around in the dark, making silly footprints in the dirt. Then he got to thinking about this outsider and wondered just how he could have gotten there without being spotted passing the camps farther down the road, and how he had gotten out again, or where he had gone to. Jerry followed the tracks, and that is where he got his second shock. Tracing them backwards, he found that the tracks came almost straight down an incline of about 75 degrees into the road ahead of the parked cat, then proceeded down the road to one side, circled the machine, and finally went on down toward the camp. Before getting there, however, they cut across the road and went straight down an even steeper incline and continued into the forest, with a measured stride that varied only when an obstacle had to be stepped over or a bank was so steep a purchase had to be obtained with the heels only. The stride was enormous, and proved on measurement to range from 46 to 60 inches, and to average almost twice that of his own. Crew's fellow workers refused, at first, even to go and look at this preposterous nonsense that he had said he had found. But eventually some of the men, who had to go that way anyway, agreed to take a look. Some of them, Jerry tells me, looked at me real queer, but there were others who reacted differently. All of them, it developed, had either seen something similar in that general area, or had heard similar tales from friends and acquaintances whom they regarded as reliable. Only the Indians present said nothing. Then they all went back to work. Nothing further happened for almost a month. Then, once again, these same monstrous footprints appeared overnight around the equipment and also farther down the road toward the valley and around a spring. Still, however, the matter remained a purely local affair for another 3 weeks, the details known only to the men working on the road and their immediate families. Then in the middle of September, Mrs. Jessie Bemis, wife of one of the most prominent and outspoken skeptics among the road crew, wrote a letter to the leading local newspaper, the Humboldt Times of Eureka, which said, in part, "A rumor started among the men about the existence of a wild man. We regarded it as a joke. It was only yesterday that my husband became convinced that the existence of such a person is a fact. Have you heard of this wild man?" The editor of the paper, Andrew Genzoli, says that at first he regarded this letter with a thoroughly jaundiced eye, but the longer he saw it lying about on his desk, the more it intrigued him, and finally he decided to publish it. He expected a storm of derision. Instead, a trickle of confirmatory correspondence began to come in from the Willow Creek area. Then on the 2nd of October, Bigfoot, as the creature was now being called, appeared again on his apparently rather cyclic route, leaving tracks for 3 nights in succession, and then vanishing for about 5 days. This time, Jerry Crew was prepared with a supply of plaster of Paris, and he made a series of casts of both right and left feet. 2 days later, he took time off to drive to Eureka on personal business, and he carried the casts along with him to show a friend. While he was there, somebody told editor Genzoli about him. When Genzoli met Jerry Crew and saw his trophies, he realized he had some real live news on his hands. He ran a front pager on it with photographs the next day. Then the balloon went up. The wire services picked it up, and almost every paper in the country printed it, while inquiry flooded in from abroad. The first I heard of this affair was a cable from a zoologist in Paris, who sounded slightly hysterical. I've done a good bit of writing on this general subject, and so I get a lot of esoteric cables about all sorts of things like sea monsters, abominable snowmen, two-headed calves, reincarnated Indian girls, and so forth, the majority of which I am inclined to look into because the world is, after all, a large place, and we don't know much about a good deal of it. I rather naturally assumed the location as given, California, must have been a complete error of misquote. It is all very well to have an abominable creature pounding over snow-covered passes in Nepal and Tibet. After all, giant pandas and yaks, and antelope with the nose like Jimmy Durante, and other unlikely things have come from thereabouts. And it is even conceivable that there might be little hairy men in the vast forests of Mozambique, in view of the almost equally unlikely but more or less hairless pygmies of the eastern Congo that are there for all tourists to see. But a wild man with a 16-inch foot and a 50-inch stride tromping around California is a little too much to ask even Californians to accept. Of course, there have been similar reports of a like creature called Sasquatch from all over British Columbia for a century, but then Canadians are still sort of foreigners, and also there are far too many Indian legends mixed up in their stories. The amazing thing in this California case was that the world press actually took it seriously enough to carry it as a news item. Not so for the rest of humanity. One and all, apart from a few ardent mystics and professional crackpots, rose up in one concerted howl of outrage. Everybody connected with the business, and notably editor Genzoli, was immediately smothered in a storm of brickbats. In the meantime, however, a number of other things had happened. Most notable among these was the reappearance of Bigfoot the night before the contractor, Ray Wallace, returned from a business trip. Wallace had heard rumors that either his men were pulling some kind of stunt up in the hills, or somebody was pulling one on them. And he was apprehensive, but he told me the skilled and reliable workers were not plentiful, and under the best conditions the remote location was not conducive to the staying power of anyone. he suspected that someone might be deliberately trying to disrupt his operation, and he was determined to solve the mystery. Now, it so happened that Ray's brother, Wilbur Wallace, was also working on this job, and he, in addition to seeing the tracks many times, had witnessed 3 other startling occurrences. These he described in detail to his brother. First, it was reported to him by his men that a nearly full 55-gallon drum of diesel fuel, which had been left standing beside the road, was missing, and that Bigfoot tracks led down the road from a steep bank to the place where it had stood, then crossed the road, continued on down the hill, and finally went over the lower bank and away into the bush. Wilbur Wallace found the tracks exactly as the men had stated, and he also found the oil drum at the bottom of a steep bank about 175 feet from the road. It had rolled down this bank after having been thrown from the top. What is more, it had been lifted from its original resting place and apparently carried to this point, for there were no marks in the soft mud indicating that it had been either rolled or dragged. Second, a length of 18-inch galvanized steel culvert disappeared from a dump overnight and was found at the bottom of another bank some distance away. Third, a tire for a carryall earth mover, weighing over 250 pounds, had likewise been in part carried and in part rolled a quarter of a mile down the road and hurled into a deep ravine. Even after hearing these things from his own brother, Ray Wallace remained skeptical. However, on his first day on the job, he stopped for a drink at a spring on the way down the hill when he himself stepped right into a mass of Mr. Bigfoot's tracks in the soft mud around the outflow. Ray Wallace is a hard-boiled and pragmatic man, and he was already experiencing trouble keeping his men on the job. Hand-picked as they were, quite a few had simply packed up and left. Wallace was convinced now that somebody was trying to disrupt his work, and this made him furious. In fact, he got so angry, he brought in a man named Ray Kerr, who had read of the matter in the press and who had asked for a job on the road in order to be able to spend his spare time trying to track the culprit. Kerr brought with him a friend by the name of Bob Brazel, who had hunted professionally in Mexico and who owned 4 good dogs and a British-made gun of enormous caliber which considerably impressed the local people. Kerr, an experienced equipment operator, did a full daily job. Brazel did not take a job, but only hunted. Tracks were soon picked up and followed by them. Then one night in late October, they saw it. They were driving down the new road after dark and came upon what seemed to be a gigantic humanoid or human-shaped creature covered all over with 6-inch brown fur squatting by the road. They said it sprang up in their headlights, crossed the road in 2 strides, and vanished into the undergrowth. They went after it with a flashlight, but the brush was too thick to see anything. They measured the road and found it to be exactly 20 feet wide from the place where the creature had been squatting to the little ditch where it had landed after those 2 strides. Spurred by this encounter, they redoubled their hunting forays, but their dogs disappeared a few days later when they were following Bigfoot's tracks some distance from the roadhead. The dogs were never seen again, though a story was told that their skins and bones were found spattered about some trees. All this was, of course, taken with hoots or derision by everybody, including those in Willow Creek who had not seen the tracks. There was one notable exception: Andrew Ginzoli of the Humboldt Times. He accompanied his senior staff photographer, Neil Hulbert, and visited Bluff Creek personally, found some fresh tracks, and photographed them. He also found something else. In following the tracks down the road, they came across a pile of feces of typically human form, but, as they put it, of absolutely monumental proportions. They contemplated going to fetch a shovel and some container by taking this back to Eureka for analysis, but it was a very hot night, and there was a 5-hour drive over a dangerous road ahead of them, and while they did not say so, it would not be surprising if they were a little shaken by the night's events. Later, however, Ray Wallace also stumbled upon a similar enormous mass of human-shaped droppings. He shoveled them into a gallon can and found they occupied exactly the same volume as a single evacuation from a 1,200-pound horse. Further foot tracks and other incidents are continually being reported. Later last spring, 2 flyers, a husband and wife in a private plane, were flying over the Bluff Creek area. It was April, and there was still snow on the mountain tops, some of which are bare of trees. It is alleged that they spotted great tracks in the snow and that, on following these up, they sighted a creature that had made them. It was enormous, humanoid, and covered with brown fur. I am still trying to locate this couple, but at the time of writing have not identified them. Other recent reports are more easily pinned down. Among these are alleged statements by 2 doctors of having met a Bigfoot on Route 299 early in 1958, and a lady of great integrity who, with her daughter, saw 2, one smaller by far than the other, feeding on a hillside above the Hoopa Valley. This lady, who does not wish her name to be used, also told my partner that when she was a young girl, people used to see these creatures from time to time when they went fishing up certain creeks leading into the Hoopa Valley, and that she once saw one swimming across Bluff Creek when it was in flood. She also states that people did not go above certain points in these valleys because of the presence of the creatures. More pertinent, however, were a positive flood of further alleged discoveries of similar foot tracks by all manner of local citizenry over a wide area and extending back for many years. These all came to light as soon as the local press began to take this matter seriously. A Humboldt Times reporter named Betty Allen did some talking to the Hoopa and Yurok Indians about these matters and added more to the growing picture. One middle-aged Hoopa man merely reacted, "Good Lord, have the white men finally got around to that?" More information came from a Mr. Oscar Mack, an older gentleman of the Yurok clan of the Klamaths. The Bigfoot, he told Mrs. Allen, and one of my partners, were run out of this country by the miners in the 1948-49 gold rush. Before that, there were quite a number of them. It is further reported, and this is by an engineer now residing in Eureka, that in the late 1890s on the Chetco River, in what is now extreme southwestern Oregon, a pair of Bigfoot once infested a mining camp, stole and wrecked equipment. 3 men were later found mutilated and virtually pulverized near the camp, but in open ground where they could not have fallen or been fallen upon by anything other than an animal. There is a strange writer to this story, namely that the local Indians said that active volcanoes had broken out in the area to which the Bigfoot fled in the not-too-distant past, and that all the game had been killed, but that the Big Feet had survived. Similar stories are numerous. I have transcripts of 24, many from old newspapers. The most recent development came to my attention as I was writing this story. On August 16th, 1959, 2 men, John W. Green of British Columbia and Bob Titmus of Berkeley, California, found more Bigfoot tracks 23 miles up the new road. They also found a great number of long, dark hairs, ranging from 1 to 10 inches in length, stuck on the trunks of fir trees at a height up to 6 feet 4 inches above the ground, plus many piles of droppings which contained small bones, fur, and the residue of various vegetation. So, what are we to make of all this? Obviously, there is something very strange going on around Bluff Creek in Humboldt County. There seems to have been something very similar going on, for a century at least, in this general area. Crazy as it may seem, the whole thing cannot simply be dismissed as a lie. and nobody has yet been able to think up any way in which such a thing could have been perpetrated as a hoax or publicity stunt, or how, or why. Not even a machine, and certainly nobody on stilts, could have navigated the inclines the wearer of these feet negotiated. Besides, it altered its stride, dug its toes 6 inches deep into steep banks going up, and thumped its round heel equally far into them going down. Something left enormous piles of dung, quite unlike those of any bear thereabouts, and something seems to have toted 50-gallon steel drums full of liquid, iron culverts, and truck tires for considerable distances. Something in that area makes a high-pitched whistling. I have had this noise imitated for me by 3 different people who have heard it in the forest, and it is always the same, but I cannot describe it. Forgetting the past, and all those who said they have seen the perpetrators, let us examine the possible explanations for these foot tracks. They were seen and existed. Of that there cannot be the slightest shadow of doubt. The first-hand witnesses are too many, too varied in background, and too honest for anybody, short of a complete idiot, to any longer suggest questioning their statements. There are many very good reasons for stating that the tracks could not be made by a normal man, nor by a machine. Therefore, there are only 3 alternatives. They must have been made either by an abnormal man, an animal, or a creature somewhere between the two. For the abnormal man theory there is something to be said, though I would like to stress that a story published in the local press to the effect that a 7-foot youngster ran away from the CCC camp, that sailor. Therefore, there are only 3 alternatives. They must have been made either by an abnormal man, an animal, or a creature somewhere in between the two. For the abnormal man theory there is something to be said, though I would like to stress that a story published in the local press to the effect that a 7-foot youngster ran away from the CCC camp at Salyer in 1933 is not true. I have interviewed the now-retired head of that camp, who states that there never was such a boy, but that a tall lad was lost for 4 days in the forest, but was finally found. There is, however, a factually confirmed story from Idaho, dated 1868, of a 6-foot 8-inch Indian Negro white man with a chest measurement of 59 inches, named Star Wilkerson, who was shot for a number of murders by one John Wheeler acting on behalf of the community. His feet measured 17.5 inches, and he was almost completely wild. The casts by Jerry Crew of the Bluff Creek Bigfoot measured 16 inches and are completely human, except that the toes are relatively small, are somewhat rounder, and are arranged more squarely to the long axis of the feet than in an average human being. Thus, it is possible that there could have been some runaway human individual of large but not excessive stature, and of considerable bulk and weight, for engineers affirm that the prints he left indicate a weight of at least 750 pounds, residing in the large uninhabited area of northwest California. But there is nothing in the records to indicate who such a person might be, or where he came from, and the records have been most carefully searched. And there is nothing everybody, the press, the public at large, the few scientists who have deigned to read the accounts, and especially the local inhabitants, would like more than to find out there is such a runaway human being. The suggestion that these tracks are made by an animal need hardly be discussed. The only animal that might be suspected is a bear, of which there are some of the black Euarctos in the surrounding areas, but not, strangely, in the Bluff Creek Valley, and just conceivably there are grizzled brown, dish-faced Arctos bears, commonly called grizzly. The latter is most unlikely. Further, no animal has a human foot. The third and last alternative is a humanoid, an intermediate creature between man and what we call an animal, The existence of any such creature today is, of course, almost unthinkable. Yet the bones of just such intermediates, and of several grades, from the bent-legged Neanderthal submen to the stunted-brained pithecanthropines of China and Java, and the pygmy Australopithecines of South Africa with their half-simian, half-human anatomy, and the gigantic 8 to 12-foot human-like ape called Gigantopithecus from South China, have now been unearthed. There were giants in those days. Could some have survived? Above all else, could they have ever lived in North America and survived in, of all places, California? The astonishing thing is that they could well have done both. We now know there were men on this continent before the last ice advance, and during the last million years during which man evolved, many large and less competent mammals crossed back and forth between the old and new worlds in the northern hemisphere. The elk, mammoth, brown or dish-faced bears, and lesser folk like the beaver, marmot, mink, and others. Why should not have submen or ape-men that were resident in what is now northern China have not also done so? And if they did, why should not they, like the moose and elk, have survived the southward ice advances, even if mammoths, mastodons, the giant beaver, and a large lion did not? After all, some ape-men made tools, and they may have made fire. They would have been better equipped to survive the cold, even if they did not emigrate southward during the ice ages. If they survived, moreover, to where would they retreat? Obviously, to those highly inaccessible areas not populated by modern man. And one such place, strangely enough, is the northwestern tip of California. Before you're tempted to scoff and put this story down, bear a few things in mind. This area extends over 100,000 square miles, and nobody lives there. Apart from the higher ridges and mountain peaks, the ground area is completely concealed from the air by forest. It has never been properly surveyed or mapped, yet for all this the area is well watered, overgrown with berries, full of small game, and never completely snowed in. Though it nestles in the midst of civilization, it is completely uncivilized. Almost anything could be living there, and from the evidence, something is. Will somebody please do something about it before it is too late? This has been copyrighted by Ivan T. Sanderson, True Magazine, December 1959. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning,